Chapter 10. A New Life. A New Country Over the Border. When I stepped into the Turkish immigration office, I remembered that I had given all my money to my friend and had not kept any for myself. But as I left the immigration office, I saw my bus and discovered that it had been waiting for me for over 2.5 hours. My friend had paid the driver to wait. Some passengers were understandably angry at me for being made to wait so long, but some were happy that I was released and allowed to enter Turkey. It was night. The driver drove towards Ankara, a 22-hour drive. We stopped for breakfast the following morning. My friend and I got out, and the first thing I did was to call my wife and let her know that I crossed the border and I was safe in Turkey. As soon as she heard my voice, she did not allow me to speak. She told me that the revolutionary mayor had called the border and ordered them to return me to our city to face justice. Someone in the mayor's office called one of my friends who informed my wife that I was in danger. She wanted to warn me to stay away from the border if I was not already there. She knew that the revolutionary mayor was a violent man. He was not a Taleshi, but from Tehran. The mullahs appointed their own leaders in each city. Generally speaking, they do not appoint native men to the important positions, knowing locals favor their own. They appointed merciless people to keep the authoritarian Islamic leadership alive. "I am in Turkey," I told her. "Do not worry anymore. If they come to ask about me, just say I have told you that I was going somewhere and would come back soon." I did not hear any response. "Hello? Hello?" I thought perhaps my wife had fainted after hearing such unbelievable news. She was okay, only in shock after receiving my news. I was glad to pass the message of my successful escape to her. Our trip came to an end in Ankara, the capital city of Turkey. My friend and I slept in a hotel that night, and the next morning I went to introduce myself at the United Nations office. They set a date for an interview. If I passed the interview, they would send me as a refugee to a Western country. There were many Iranians waiting in front of the United Nations building. One of them told me that he had secured an apartment with the Taleshi man, and there was room for me if I wanted to share the rent with him. I went to his apartment, met the man from my hometown, and decided to live with them. They both were members of the Mojahedin Iran, or MKI. They had finished their interviews with the United Nations and were waiting for the results. The majority of Iranian refugees who had enrolled in the United Nations were the members of MKI. MKI members in Turkey expected me to join their group and continue fighting against the mullahs of Iran. After Dr. Bani Sadr escaped from Iran, he united with the MKI for a while. Because I was pro-Dr. Bani Sadr while I was in power in Iran, the MKI members in Turkey expected me to join their party. I did not wish to get involved in any political activities again, so I refused the request. Unfortunately, this cost me a great deal. They had power in the United Nations in Turkey. Almost all Persian, Farsi interpreters in the United Nations were members of the MKI, and they had established a strong relationship with some of its interviewers. On the day of my interview, I walked out of the interview room because my interpreter was not honest in the interpretation, twisting my words. The extortion was so obvious that even with knowing a little English, I was able to understand it. I informed the interviewer a few times, but he shouted over me and asked me to stop complaining. I eventually said to the interviewer that I had a problem with the way I was interviewed, and I was not going to tolerate it. I asked for another interview time with an interpreter who was not a member of MKI. After I said this, I walked out. I went to the information center and reported what had transpired during the interview. He said it was the interviewer's responsibility to arrange another interview. Shortly after the first interview, I was granted another with the same interviewer as before, but the interpreter once again turned out to be a member of the MKI. "Excuse me, sir, don't you remember that I was displeased with the first MKI interpreter and applied for a second interview with a non-MKI member?" I asked. When the attendant said that he was unable to get a non-MKI interpreter, I told him, "I'm sorry that my request was not important to you, sir. I will not be able to sit for an interview with an interpreter who is not translating accurately. This gentleman, along with a previous interpreter, has already threatened my application. So how can you expect me to allow his interpretation?" I walked out of the United Nations office, never to return. A week later, I left Ankara and went to Istanbul, where I lived with an Iranian student who was from my city. After a month, my wife and daughters joined me in Istanbul. Because we had money, we did not have financial concerns. We did not know what would happen to us in the future, however. Would we find a country in which to live? Would we stay our entire life in Turkey? If yes, then how? To get a Turkish visa, you had to have a huge sum of money and start a business. We did not have such money. I decided to learn the language, obtain a student visa, and enter a university. My family would need a dependent visa. If we had these visas, we would not need to renew our tourist visa every 3 months by exiting, then re-entering the country across the Turkey and Bulgaria border. The Turkish language was not so foreign to me. Azeri, the language of my mother and the Azerbaijanis, is very close to Turkish and is in the family of Turkic languages. It was a summer of 1988 that I sat for an entry exam for a master's degree in management. I passed the exam, exceeding the standard, and was accepted. My family applied for a year-long dependent residential visa. However, because we refused to be involved in any bribery and corruption in the application process, our family visa delayed and we received it in the 10th or 11th month of each year we stayed in Turkey. Since the visas weren't issued to us until October or November of each year and expired at the end of December, my family did not have visas for the other months of the year. Without a visa, no one was allowed to stay in Turkey for more than 90 days. So every 90 days, my wife and children went to the border of Turkey and Bulgaria, entered into Bulgaria 5 minutes before midnight, and returned to Turkey 5 minutes after midnight, since they could not legally exit and enter Turkey within the same day. It was very hard for a woman with 3 young children to endure the difficulties of such a journey in the cold, in the middle of the night, and in such an insecure area. My wife bore this harshness for the entire educational season in 1988 and 89. The heavy burden of travel and homesickness prompted her to return to Iran with our children in the first half of June 1989. It would be 5 months before I would see them again. Betrayed by a business partner. I had already built a relationship with an Iranian man who had a small business in Istanbul. At his request, I pulled my money with his and joined him as a business partner. We planned to export Turkish products to Germany. Although I knew nothing about the export business in Turkey, I believed I would learn from him. Our capital totaled $50,000. While waiting for our import-export license, we decided to get involved with buying and selling anything in the Istanbul market that could provide us with extra money. We got involved in the currency market and continued to make more money. In July 1989, I informed my partner that I needed time off to prepare for my master's thesis at Istanbul University. He supported my educational pursuit, and because I trusted him, I left my share of capital with him. We spoke a few times during the week, but when I attempted to contact him after receiving my master's degree, he was nowhere to be found. I decided to contact a real estate friend of his I had met previously. When I told him what had happened, his words shocked me. He may have taken the money and left. Honestly, I do not know where he is. At his suggestion, I checked with my partner's travel agent, who informed me that my partner had gone to Germany. The news was overwhelming as I contemplated bankruptcy and a bleak future for my family. I didn't know what to do. From the real estate agent, I received the phone number of my partner's wife, who was in Germany visiting relatives at the time. When I reached her, she told me that her husband had been caught with drugs and was in prison. She apologized and said she would try to inform the police and perhaps get some of my money returned. In my heart, I did not trust her words. I went to the German consulate in Istanbul and to the International Police Bureau for help, but with no documentation of our partnership or my share of the money, there was nothing they could do. The company was registered in my partner's name initially, and I was not able to prove that I was his legal business partner. Also, I could not get a visa, nor did I have money to travel to Germany. What little money I had would be gone soon. I needed to work, but had enrolled at the university to earn a PhD. Part-time work would not be enough to support my family. The situation was extremely distressing. I recalled that there was an Iranian Christian group who came to my business partner, and he also attended their church in Istanbul sometimes. I decided to go there to see if anyone had any knowledge of his whereabouts. The church had an outreach to Iranian refugees, and my partner had received help there. I had learned about this when I visited his home and saw a Bible in the Persian language sitting on his coffee table. Startled that I had seen it, my partner said, although he thought it was a good book, he didn't believe in it. He was a Muslim and would stay a Muslim. To have this book in his possession was illegal in Islam. That's why he showed nervousness when I saw the book. He told me that the church consisted of Christians who were afraid to live in Iran after the revolution. Many had been Muslims, but now were followers of Jesus. I was shocked. Muslims became Christians? How can this be? I asked him. Whether you believe it or not, they say that they have left Islam behind and they are Christians now. Not only that, but they're brave too, since the penalty for apostasy in Islam is death, he said. How can Muslims leave a perfect and civilized religion and go back to an uncivilized one? Christianity is 600 years older than Islam, and Islam came to perfect the defects of Christianity, I said. Even though I had lost my zeal for Islam, this was what I was supposed to say as a Muslim after learning that he had been in their church. He offered to take me to talk to someone at the church, but I refused. I have escaped from one death sentence. I do not want another one, I said. Please leave me out of this. How did you come to know these people? They have helped a lot of Iranian refugees here in Turkey, he replied. They don't hesitate to help anyone. Last Christmas, they invited many Iranians to their Christmas party, and I was one of them. At the end of the party, they gave a Bible to me as a gift. Wow, I said. They are brave. Secretly, I wanted to go and learn why these people left Islam and joined Christianity, but I was afraid to express myself to him. I was schooled in Islam and was familiar with its intolerance towards other religions. I knew that any soft approach toward Christianity could expose me to the danger of Islamic punishment. Though I was backslidden from the practices of Islam and was living as a nominal Muslim, I kept my thoughts to myself in order to protect myself from possible danger as much as I could. One day, while we were going to the bazaar in Istanbul, my business partner showed me the church. It was an old, beautiful building on a hilly area. I saw some graffiti on the wall of the church left by radical Muslims who wanted it closed. However, after my business partner had taken my money and escaped, I decided to go to that church to inquire about him. For the first time in my life, I was going to a Christian church. I felt very uncomfortable. This was a zone prohibited by Islam. At any time, radical Muslims could enter the church and shoot everybody, including me. Besides, I wanted to keep a low profile because of my heavy involvement with the Iranian Revolution and my escape. I did not want the church members to know that I was a radical Muslim and a fugitive. Most Iranians in Turkey kept their lives secret. Turkey was not a safe place for Iranians who were ex-politicians or fugitives. The terrorists of the Islamic Republic of Iran were spread everywhere in Turkey, and they killed many fugitive politicians in Turkey. My business partner had told me that some Iranians had lied to these Christians, receiving financial aid from them when they did not need it. I was concerned that they may not believe I'd lost my money, so as I stood in front of the church, I changed my mind and did not go inside. As I left, I realized I had to do something to bring back the money I had lost. I decided to enter the church. Despite my reservations, I entered the churchyard and knocked on the door. An elderly lady answered and asked, "Who are you looking for?" When I told her I was there to visit someone from the Iranian church, she said that they would be there Sunday afternoon, so I returned on Sunday. As I was entering the church, I saw people playing musical instruments in front of a crowd. People were standing, singing, and lifting their hands. This was a shocking sight to me. Music is evil in Islam, especially in a place of worship. Committed Muslims never listen to any music. I was shocked even more when I saw ladies were also singing and raising their voices among men and in a worship place. Immediately I thought, wow, this is one reason that Islam is called superior to Christianity. I had grown up with music my entire life. My father, a nominal Muslim, listened to music on his radio. He himself had a beautiful voice, singing from time to time in gatherings with his friends or on the farm. My mother's brother was an Azeri musician and made his income playing at weddings and other celebrations. My mother is an Azeri. Music is interwoven into Azeri's culture and lifestyle. Music has accompanied the meaningful messages or poems of Persians and Azeri forefathers for generations. I loved music, but had put it away because the Islamic Republic of Iran prohibited it. Despite my early connection to music, I had never seen or heard of it in a worship context. When I saw the congregation participating in music, my immediate thought was sin. I stayed aloof, sitting in the back of the church. I was afraid that if a Muslim came in and saw me standing, he would accuse me of participating in this evil practice with Christians. I had enough problems and did not want to provide grounds for further accusations by the Iranian authorities or other Muslims. I sat behind the people closest to the main door thinking if something strange happened, I could easily run away. When the singing stopped, a Turkish Christian was introduced to the crowd and asked to preach. He spoke in Turkish, and someone interpreted it into Persian for those Iranians who did not know Turkish. Since I understood both languages, I heard the message twice. But I wasn't paying attention. All I could think of was my business partner and how I wanted to kill him. When the service was over, a few people welcomed me warmly. I told them the story of my loss, and they offered to help, saying that they would do their best to find my partner in Germany and try to get back my money, or at least some of it. They said that they had many Christian friends in Germany, and through them, they would be able to find and contact him. They asked me to keep in touch with them so that I could be informed of any news from Germany. I asked them how I could keep in touch. They said, keep coming to church, the best place to see each other frequently. This was not good news since I was afraid to go to church. I was expecting them to see me somewhere else and inform me of the news. However, reluctantly, I responded that it would be okay, but in my heart, the response was no. Going to church. Because of my fear, I decided not to go to the church anymore. Then I thought that if I did not go, they would think that I had given up. They would not ask their friends in Germany to search for my business partner. So I began attending the church every Sunday with fear. In the first couple of weeks, I decided not to pay attention to what they were preaching. I thought that their words might influence me and cause problems for me with Islam. But they were such nice, kind people. Because of their loving attitude, I was not able to cover my ears any longer. As soon as I started to listen to their messages, my assumption about Christians and their teaching began to change. I heard amazing philosophical, doctrinal, and moral things which I had never heard before. I thought I was going to the church for my money, but God sent me there for a different reason. The world of Islam had framed me into a world of misinformation, selfishness, religious nationalism, discrimination, and racism. I was amazed how these Christians' teachings were so different to what we were taught of Christians. They were all talking about God and showed a great reverence to God. They read the Bible, prayed, and sang to God all in their own mother tongues. In Islam, you have to pray to Allah in Arabic, a language that you do not know but have just memorized some words in order to repeat them daily. It occurred to me, if God is the creator of all nations and is mighty and all-knowing, He would know their languages and speak to them through their languages. Why would He give them a hard time and push them to communicate with Him via a strange language? I was also amazed by their modesty. Muslims are taught that Christians are the most immoral and ungodly people in the world, and their women are whores because they do not cover themselves in an Islamic way. I was shocked to see how lovely, godly, and modest these people were. I thought, why do we call this respectful life ungodliness and immoral? I saw such a contrast between the behavior of Christian men toward their wives and the treatment of women in Islam. We humiliated our wives and beat them according to the instruction of the Quran in Islam and called it moral and godly. But in contrast, we called the sincere love and friendliness of these Christians to their spouses immoral. Is it moral if we, as the Quran instructs, lock our wives in a room or force them to be indistinguishable, covering their faces anytime they go outside? Is it moral to call our wives lesser than us, that they are our properties, and only men are able to fulfill God's requirements? I continued to search for the responses to these questions as I compared myself and my beliefs with these Christians. I was shocked by the answers I found. The followers of Christ had no right to do such things to their wives. I never heard a curse word from them. They said lying is lying, no matter who the opposite party might be. We learned from the Quran and Islam that lying for the sake of Allah was legitimate and moral. How could we Muslims call Christians immoral for avoiding any kind of lie, no matter to friend or foe, and believing that God rejects all kinds of lies? Another thing that amazed me was the belief in unconditional love, or loving and respecting people unconditionally. It is the unconditional love that removes the barrier among people, they taught. This was so different to the teachings of Allah, who cannot tolerate unconditional love. Not only did He not love humanity, but also designed and created calamity and pain for them and created them sinners. What kind of love can it be if someone gives you pain, corrupts you, and rids you of choice? We were taught to disrespect Christians and destroy their interests as much as we could, yet these Christians were taught to love us. My mind was reeling. Am I dreaming? I said to myself. We followed the Quran and called Christians the worst of beasts, unclean, ungodly, infidels, and unloving, but they were teaching and practicing unconditional love. They were not just lovely in words, but also in deeds. They had every right to reject me because of my background, but they didn't. I found the difference between the teaching of Islamists and these Christians was the difference between darkness and light. I remembered the poems of one of our renowned 13th century poets, Maulana Rumi, who said, "The love of the infidels drew my attention, and because of that, I am now smooth or loving, gentle and simple." He's criticizing Muslim nations for calling infidels unlovely, whereas their love changed him totally. Now I was able to understand the meaning of his call that Muslims need to learn valuable things from so-called infidel Christians. Not only were these Christians' relational values amazing, their doctrine and philosophy of God were also amazing. They were teaching that God was personal. He could reveal himself to people to establish a personal relationship with them and save them from the bondage of Satan. They were claiming that they were saved, united with God and his ambassadors on earth in order to reveal God's plan to people and lead them to his light. Their messages were challenging, and I found truth in their description of God as the personal God and Savior. In the midst of meditation on their words, I said to myself, of course, if God is absolutely just, holy, loving, and living, he must present himself as the ultimate authority in all these good things and equip us so that we are able to live them and use them in our relationship with others. If God is called the role model, he must be a personal and revealing God in order to become the role model for personal humanity. This was a new and powerful philosophical discovery for me that God is personal everywhere and able to have a personal relationship with everybody. He is a living God for living people and for an actual relationship. My heart desired to be rid of spiritual slavery since God was around. If lawlessness is a reality, if Satan exists, I said to myself, then I absolutely desire to be released from his bondage and influence. But how? Without verbalizing my question, I received the answer through the teaching of the Christians. There are two spiritual kingdoms in the world, the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan. You cannot be dependent on both at the same time. Your dependency on one means that you are separated from the other. Satan and God have opposite qualities and cannot live with each other. God is light and holy. Satan is dark and unholy. If you belong to the darkness, you cannot be in the light. In the same way, if you have the citizenship of light, you do not belong to the darkness. Darkness and light cannot coexist. If you belong to Satan's kingdom, you cannot save yourself. Satan is your king, has power over you, and does not believe in freedom. If you do not call on God who is mightier than Satan, you will not be able to release yourself. God has given you freedom of choice to decide to live with Satan or call on him to release you from Satan. This time, I remembered another of Maulana's poems. For sure, all are captive to death. A captive is not to release you from prison. I was so amazed on how God had left this great witness in my culture among Iranians. Maulana must have read the Gospel of Christ in order to be able to come up with such a Christian philosophy instead of the expected Islamic philosophy. The philosophy and logic of the Christians was very influential to me. What was happening here? What am I hearing here? I loved what they were teaching, but I did not express it to anyone. I was afraid that if I verbalized my agreement, they would take it as confirmation that I believed all of what they were teaching, which I didn't. They called Jesus God and the Son of God, and they spoke much about Jews. Allah and Muhammad and Islamic scholars dislike and curse Christians for this. They believe that Christians have made a man, Jesus, as God for themselves and made Jesus equal to God. The truth was that Muhammad and his followers were unable or unwilling to understand the Christian belief that man was unable to elevate himself or someone else to the position of God, but that God was able to reveal himself in any form, just as he did in manifesting himself in Jesus. I was still unable to understand why Jesus was the only way to heaven. If Muhammad was to come after him, then Jesus could not be the only way. Even though Muhammad was unsure of his own spiritual destination after death and unable to proclaim himself as the way, he still maintained that he was the only one to lead others to perfection. For this reason, his successors and followers felt obligated to gather the entire world under the umbrella of Islam despite the cost. Since the cultural atmosphere among Islamic communities is always hostile toward Christian beliefs, I was afraid of my relationship with Christians who called Jesus the God and the Son of God. The Quran not only rejects the deity of Christ and curses Christians for such a belief, it also forbids Muslims to listen to their teachings or become their friends. Every time these Christians opened the Bible, I heard about Jews. I was brought up in a way to hate Jews. As a Muslim, it was so dangerous for you to keep quiet if you hear anything nice about Jews. Since childhood, I had learned that Jews were the worst among all non-Muslims. The only solution for them was death. Muslims were obligated to clean the world of Jews. The last day would not approach until all Jews were killed according to the instruction of Muhammad. At the university in Iran, I became a real hater of Jews because of the instructions of the Quran and Islam. Iranians call themselves Aryan proudly. Hitler's philosophy of hatred and anti-Semitism had a major influence on some radical Iranian Muslims, including myself, who believed that Allah had ordained Iranian Aryans in a similar way he did with Hitler to hate and kill Jews and erase them from the surface of the earth. My mind and heart were corrupted with this hatred and the fear behind it, and it was not easy to see myself among a group of Christians who loved Jews like any other people. I was struggling in my inner being. Although I was moved by some messages, there was still a fear of getting involved with Christians. Is this going to establish another death sentence for me? I thought to myself. However, the belief of this Christian group was always challenging me. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Matthew 10:28. In other words, stand for the truth even if it costs you your life. The truth rules only with the sacrifices of truth-loving people. Would I dare stand for the truth? One day, when alone in my rented flat in Istanbul, I saw myself as a man who had faced only difficulties. Sadness overcame me like a heavy weight as I recounted all the bad events which had occurred throughout my life. The world and everything in it, including myself, seemed unjust. I turned my face up to heaven and cried out to God, "Why don't you help me? I know that you are mighty and can help me." I was so angry at God. I wanted him to appear so that I could hit him, believing he was the reason for my pain. Why should I carry such burdens when there was a mighty Creator who was able to save and comfort me? From the depth of my heart, I believed that there was a God and that he could help me, but I thought that he was ignoring me. In the midst of these emotional moments, my conscience started to raise its critical view. Which God are you crying to Allah or the God of the Bible? To an impersonal God or the personal God? To a God who does not have an ear to hear or to one who has an ear? It was amazing that my conscience was counseling me to cry to a God who is personal, has ears and listens. It was telling me that Islam was a barrier between me and my Creator and Savior since it does not believe in any personal relationship between God and humanity. I didn't know that my cries in Islam were futile since I was not crying to the true God. How could I cry and express my personal agony and anger to an impersonal God? An impersonal God would not be able to understand my personal needs and relate to me personally. So the pain in my heart and the tears of my eyes taught me meaningful lessons and directed me to the true and living God. The moment was very logical and also ripe for lifting my eyes to heaven sincerely and meaningfully. It was the first time in my life that I was seeing the necessity of an immediate touch and healing from God, believing he could reveal himself to me personally and help me. The following night, I had a dream. There were earthquakes and violent winds. People were running and crying. Houses were demolished and many people were killed. I was in my father's house alone. It was the same house in which I grew up. In my dream, I stayed in the open room at the front of the old house and cried out to God, "Why don't you help me? I'm alone here." Immediately after my cry, a light appeared in the sky and said, "I am Jesus. Come out of your father's old house. Be not afraid. I will help you." So I rushed out of my father's house and ran toward an apple tree in the front yard, which the light showed me. I fell to the ground and turned as the old house fell down. When I awoke, the startling dream kept me from falling back to sleep. The events in the dream began to occupy my mind. I wondered if something was going to happen to me. I was rescued, but my father's house was destroyed. Did the dream mean that I was safe outside my country, but my other family members, including my wife and children, were going to die? I also started to question God's response to my cry. I thought that I had asked for help, but he destroyed my old house. In the Middle East, the expression of the deepest pain of your life is verbalized by the saying, "My house was ruined." Was I going to face more difficulties and experience more pain in the future? In the following days, I was filled with anxiety. I prepared myself for bad news. The next Sunday, I went to church still hoping for news of my money. What I heard shocked and amazed me. The title of the sermon was "The House on the Rock of Jesus" from Luke 6:48. The preacher spoke of things that I had seen and heard in my dream. He was calling the congregation to newness of life. Leave your old house. Leave your father's house. Your old house is a house of sin, the house of your selfish desire and the house of your old nature that you've inherited from Adam. It is a house built on sand, which is easily destroyed. Come out. Leave it, otherwise it will collapse on you. Come and live in the house that Christ has built for you on the rock. Nothing can destroy this house, because it is the house of absolute freedom, joy, and peace. Christ is the Prince of glory, peace, and love. His unconditional love has lifted him up, soaring on high like an eagle. He wants to establish you on this higher ground. This is the ground where Satan cannot reach. It is the ground of God, the ground of salvation and victory over all inhuman and ungodly attitudes and values. Come to him. Do not ignore his call. What was happening here, I thought. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I was having another dream. The words of the sermon completely captivated me, but I said nothing. I still had reservations about being seen with Christians, and I still wanted my money. But inside, I felt different. I decided to read the Bible to see if anything in it related to my dream or to the words of the preacher. On the way home, the message, "Come out from your old house and live in the house of Jesus," replayed in my mind over and over. I understood that it referred to spiritual newness. The idea of newness was not strange to me, as I had delved into mystic and poetic philosophy. They spoke of newness and unity with God, each without their own type of doctrine and theory. As I repeated the call of the preacher in my mind, I was becoming more interested in reading the gospel to see if it supported a different kind of unity. If yes, I thought, then this has to be a new philosophy that I'm not aware of. From reading the first pages of the gospel, I was amazed. I discovered that unlike all other religions, the salvation of humanity and the establishment of God's kingdom in their hearts is a present reality, not left for the life after. The gospel proclaims the personal presence of God among people. Those who recognize the presence of God and open themselves to Him receive the kingdom of God in their hearts. The kingdom of heaven is near. Matthew 3:2 and 4:17. The kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. Unlike the God of the Bible, Allah in Islam is not a personal God able to have a personal relationship with His people or establish His kingdom in their hearts. He did not reveal Himself even to His own apostle and messenger, Muhammad. If He did not reveal Himself to Muhammad and did not talk to him personally, how then could Muhammad talk about Him without knowing him personally? You need to know someone in order to be able to talk about Him. So, the gospel was opening my mind to understand that Allah could not be relevant to life if He was impersonal, unable to talk personally, and relate Himself to humanity. As I was meditating on this issue, I gradually started to doubt Allah's existence. Muslims say that Allah asked the angel Gabriel to convey His message, the Quran, to Muhammad rather than talking to him personally. This also appeared to me a wrong philosophy. If Gabriel was able to reveal himself to Muhammad, he would be a personal, revealing being. How then could impersonal, non-revealing Allah reveal Himself to the personal Gabriel and send him as His personal ambassador to Muhammad? It is impossible for an impersonal being to have a personal relationship with a personal being. Also, the impersonal God cannot talk because He does not have a mouth. We cannot attribute any head, mouth, ear, eye, hand, or leg to an impersonal God since He's non-revealing, unknowable, and indescribable by human vocabulary. No one can see an impersonal God or hear from Him. So how could Gabriel describe Him? The whole authority of the Quran concerning the existence of Allah came under question in my mind. Also, since Allah did not reveal Himself to Muhammad and did not talk to him personally, where then could the Quran come from? How could it be the instructions of the personal God for the personal needs of humankind? It cannot be anything but Muhammad's own personal words. My mind was trying to bring everything of Islam to the surface and evaluate it under the light of the Gospel's philosophy of God, even though I had not given my heart to it yet. I said to myself, what about if a Muslim believes that Allah is personal, but he decided not to reveal Himself, as I heard this from some back in Iran? To this, my response was clear. A just God does not hide Himself against the injustice of Satan if he is the ultimate authority in justice. A personal God reveals Himself in order to save and protect people from Satan. If Islam does not believe that salvation must take place in life on earth, then it is not a true religion. For Christ, a just, holy, and loving God, must not ignore people's cry for salvation. Such indifference means cooperation with Satan. God must stand for justice. I tell you, this was a good tasting revelation. The words of the gospel began to seem so real, true, delicious, and attractive to me. One by one, the beliefs to which I had been in bondage began to dissipate. I realized that an impersonal God does not exist. Therefore, the act of creation cannot be attributed to him. He is a man-made God. The God of the universe must be personal and in touch with his creatures. I paused repeatedly as I pondered the wonder of such amazing revelations. Alone in my rented apartment, I was free to revel in my amazement, but still hesitant to share my convictions with anyone. The scriptures were powerfully eye-opening and functioned like a living teacher as I read. The first chapter of the Gospel of John was one of them. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John 1:1-4 and 14. I already knew that God, or the ultimate reality in each religion, was called the Word, but I did not know that the Word could reveal himself in human flesh to demonstrate his heavenly glory and truth personally, setting a standard among humanity. I did not know that no human authority could establish the truth of God on earth better than God himself if they were not the supreme authority of the truth. Therefore, until the Word manifests and makes himself conceivable, no one will be able to reach freedom. He revealed himself in the flesh in order to prepare the way for the freedom of soul bearers. The revelation of God amazed me more than before as I read the following passages in the Gospel after understanding John chapter 1. This is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love and whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he leads justice to victory. In his name the nations will put their hope. Matthew 12:18-21. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work, 1 John 3:8b, and create peace among nations and between nations and God, Colossians 1:20. My aversion to the Christian's proclamation of Jesus as God was solved. I realized he was not a man-made God. Jesus was God, the Word and the Spirit, who revealed himself in the flesh in order to be accessible, known, and loved. God came to mankind in Jesus in order to redeem, sustain, and guide them till the end. In contrast, gods in other religions expect mankind to seek them. Neither is a personal man able to go to an impersonal God, nor is an impersonal God able to receive a personal man. In addition, man cannot unchain himself from the prison of Satan and go to God, since Satan is mightier than man and does not believe in his freedom. Everything was telling me that the true God is the God who comes and frees people from Satan. My misunderstanding about Jesus being the Son of God was fully removed as I read the Gospels. The accusation of the Quran is fully irrelevant. The Gospel never says that Jesus is the Son as a result of a sexual relationship between God and Mary. The sonship of Jesus is fully spiritual and describes his heavenly identity and citizenship. In the same way, the followers of Jesus are called the children of God. You are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household, in which God lives by his Spirit. Ephesians 2:19-22. For you did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear, but you received the spirit of sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. Romans 8:15-17. The identity of the followers of the heavenly Jesus is heavenly too. For this spiritual citizenship they are called the children of God. While reading Apostle Paul's letters, Allah disappeared completely from my heart and was replaced by the Holy God through Paul's amazing knowledge of God. Sin entered the world through one man, Romans 5:12. Through the disobedience of one man, the many were made sinners, verse 19. For since death is through man, the resurrection of the dead also is through a man. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ all will be made alive. 1 Corinthians 15:21-22. Man, not God, is the creator of sin and the cause of humanity's downfall in the Bible. In Islam, Allah is the creator of sin and lawlessness. The Quran says that every misfortune and disaster on earth and in the human soul is ordained by Allah. Satan was corrupted by Allah. Sin was inspired by Allah and humankind. Allah created man in toil and trouble. Allah leads astray. I had never read and never wanted to read the Quran in Persian because it was taught that no one could understand the words of Allah and therefore it would be better to recite it in Arabic. Also, Allah's preferred language was Arabic and He only accepted the daily Islamic prayers in Arabic. We wanted to align ourselves with Allah's will and read the Quran in Arabic if we wished to receive His blessings. This caused us to miss many contradictions in the Quran, or we would have sometimes asked ourselves, why would a holy God create sin and corrupt people? Without knowing Allah, we called Him just and holy. Can a just and holy God create sin? No. Isn't creating sin itself? Yes. If Allah is the cause of every misfortune, disaster, and unrighteous act, what would you expect His followers to do? It is natural that they will follow the example of Allah. Doesn't the sin inspired by Allah affect Muslims' spiritual, social, moral, political, and economic life? It does. If Allah has inspired sin, then can the call of Allah upon His followers be practical and lead them to righteousness and peace with others? Not at all. I never knew that the God of the Bible was different to Allah. But now, after going to the church, I started to learn the difference that Satan was the creator of sin, not God. Adam and Eve followed Satan and brought sin into the life of humanity, not God. In the Bible, angels and mankind are created with free will. Satan, Adam, and Eve chose to abuse their free will and disobey God. Their rebelliousness is called sin. The God of the Bible is holy and just. Holiness cannot create sin. A just God cannot bear or tolerate sin or have fellowship with sin. I learned that a holy God inspires holiness in the heart of humans to have peace with Him and one another. God used Paul, a former radical Jew who condemned and persecuted Christians, in the life of a Muslim, me, who was once radical and hated Christians and Jews. Paul's words made it clear to me that hatred between Muslims and Jews did not come from the holy God, rather from humanity. Unless we are saved and established in the purity of God, we will not be able to reconcile to one another. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Romans 12:9. Bless those who persecute you. Bless, do not curse. Verse 14. Or James says in his letter, the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. James 1:17. This was the lesson I learned in order to unclothe myself from the hatred of Islam and approach Jews with peace. I realized that the root of my hatred for Jews was because I was not united with the pure God and therefore was unable to imagine having peace with Jews. It was here that my heart sensed Jesus as the bearer of God's full glory and set a standard of love and care for people. Allah is not able to reconcile Muslims and Jews, but Christ can. If Allah is not able then, so are His followers unable. For decades, the world's superpowers tried to solve the conflict between Palestinians and Jews, but not only were they unable to reconcile the two sides, they fueled the hostility between them more and more. Why? First, the values of Christ have been missing there, and second, Islam was never understood clearly. The problem of the Middle East is at the root of Islam, that has sanctioned hatred for Jews. I learned from the gospel that if the root is holy, so are the branches. Romans 11:16. If God is holy, a peacemaker, righteous, loving, and joyful, so are His followers. The root of a belief lies in its God and central philosophies. We embody the characteristic of our root. The root supplies nutrition for the branches, and the branches are dependent on the root. The root of Islam is Allah. If Allah has inspired sin, which is stealing, lying, adultery, hatred, killing, and debauchery in His followers, then His call upon His followers cannot lead to peace and truth. Peace and truth cannot be from the creator of sin. For this reason, unless Muslims turn away from Allah, they will not be able to have a just and peaceful relationship with others. As a Muslim, I did not have the opportunity to investigate whether my root, Allah, was pure and true. Islam did not allow me to compare it with other religions. I therefore was ignorant and did not know whether my religion was logical or achievable. God brought me out from Iran so that I could discover Islam's impracticality and replace it with the truth. When I finished the New Testament, I read it again. I then read the Old Testament and other Christian books that were available. Reading Exodus 12:22 in the Old Testament, I was amazed, heartbroken, and then humbled as I remembered this exact religious practice in my hometown, Talesh. Some Muslim Taleshis, including my family, marked a cross on the top and both sides of the door frame with the blood of sacrificed animals or birds. Were these people Jews in the past, but kept it secret because of their fear of Muslims and then gradually lost their beliefs? This is possible because Jews lived in Iran since the time of Cyrus and Darius the Great. Islam asks Jews and Christians who live among Muslim communities not to manifest their religion publicly. It asks the males to clip the front of their heads as a shameful sign for being Jew or Christian. Some Taleshi Muslims practice clipping the front of their heads. Interestingly, some of them also had Jewish names that were not popular among Muslims. By this time, my belief in Islam was destroyed. I had valid reasons why God had to reveal himself through Christ and why revelation makes the God of the Bible superior to gods in other religions, including Allah. Now, I needed to gain a complete understanding for the superiority of Christ's social, political, and moral values, so I read the Gospels again, drawn to the root of Islam and Christianity. While I was amazed by the author of the Christian faith, I similarly was also amazed by his relational values for all foes and friends. Jesus says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Matthew 5:44. When I heard this for the first time in the church, I was not able to digest it. Islam had taught me that the enemy could not be loved. Islamic culture was alive in me, functioning in me as the root of disbelief. But now, I had to discover them one by one, get rid of them, and get myself established in the unconditional love of Christ. Nothing was more influential than his unconditional love to me. While I was his enemy, aiming to destroy his churches and replace them with mosques, he still loved me and gave his life for me. This was his approach to an enemy like me. His unconditional love was not a theory for me anymore. It worked on me so that I could approach my enemies with his logic, reason, love, and respect, and encourage them to share these beauties with me. It was so humbling to me that the God of the Bible did not rush into judgment to deal with me according to my hostile background. He rather invited me to reason with him so I could discover the root of the problems in my life. In other words, his love and grace directed his justice to reveal Satan, the root problem in me, and with my consent destroy him rather than destroying myself. He had created me for himself, and I was so precious to him. From the depth of my heart, I sensed his true compassion and realized how he was different to Allah. It was here that I was convicted and decided to put the hatred of Islam behind me and throw myself into the ocean of Christ's love and to pray for my enemies. The words of the gospel opened my eyes to understand that in God's eyes there are no differences between me and my enemies. Both of us have broken the heart of God and are in need of his grace and love and forgiveness. In a similar way, I realized that men and women are the same in the eyes of God. They are created by the same God and have the capacity to search, understand, compare, and choose. Simply physical appearance cannot make one lesser or greater than the other. Man is not given more than woman or woman than man, especially when it comes to spirituality. God is spirit and relates himself to humanity via their spiritual channel, the heart. In the spiritual arena, the heart is not defined by gender. Therefore, it is wrong, dehumanizing, and ungodly when Islam calls females deficient in their identity, understanding, or deeds. God created man and woman in order to describe unity and love strongly and supernaturally, not because one is better or has more than the other. The definition of a relationship between a husband and wife in the gospel was amazing to me. The gospel says that the unity and love between a husband and wife have to be similar to what is among the members of the body or flesh. They have to act sacrificial towards each other as Christ did to his church. To me, this was the most beautiful way of defining unity. It seemed very true to me. I was 33 years old when I read these passages in the gospel. I confirmed the truthfulness of this logic by using my own body as an example. In the entire 33 years of my life, I never realized for a single moment that my hands reject my feet or my eyes reject my ears. They loved each other and worked with each other harmoniously. In a body, if a member rejects the other, it means that this member is paralyzed and can no longer function in harmony with the others. The body with a paralyzed member is sick. With a similar logic, a family will not be healthy if the husband or wife does not have a unifying and loving faith. If the values of a society are not able to unite people together, that society cannot function as a cohesive and healthy society. More reading and meditation on the words of the Bible revealed to me the superiority of faith in Christ to all other beliefs and philosophies. I decided to put his life-giving words into practice and get myself released from any kind of self-centeredness or hostility. Number 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Matthew 22:37. Number 2, love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22:39. Number 3, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 5:44. Number 4, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Ephesians 5:25. 5, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians 3:28. Who has carried such qualities for life throughout history as Jesus has? Which religion or belief teaches such an unconditional love and includes all in its love, no matter of their gender, race, or ethnicity? The response was clear to me. Christ was the only one who brought down the walls of separation and united people with each other. He is truly the Lord of lords and the King of kings. The lords and kings of the world were not able to create such a peace among people, but Christ is able to bring people from all nations and races in order to make them the loving members of one body. He brought me out of darkness and hatred and established me in his peace. The only being hated in the kingdom of Christ is Satan, who separates people from one another. You cannot hate Satan unless you love God and humanity and desire to unite with them. There were times that I asked myself, why would a person like Jesus with all these good qualities be hated and crucified? The response that I found to this question in the Bible broke my heart and brought tears into my eyes. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Isaiah 53:3-9. Why would men hide their faces from Jesus on the cross? Why would they reject him who loved unconditionally? Why would they kill him like a criminal when no crime was to be found against him? The gospel taught me that I did not need to go far. One of those men was in me. My own ignorance and fleshly desire, like a veil, were hiding my face from the truth. I myself was taught in Islam to rely on external things and therefore was unable to see the beauty of Christ's face. I dishonored and crucified him by putting him in an Islamic frame and rejected his gospel. We were never given an opportunity to read Islam's so-called rejected gospel and see how Christians viewed Christ and why. We disliked if anyone described him in a non-Islamic way. I had never known that Allah, Muhammad, all Muslim scholars, and myself had despised Jesus. All our religious emphasis in Islam was to believe ourselves better than others, to terrorize others, to seize their lands and properties and wives, and to extend the kingdom of Islam on earth. We called all these worldly works spiritual success and more worthy than the works of Christ. We were ignorant and did not know anything about spirituality and truth. We disrespected logic, reason, and confidence and approached non-Muslims with dishonor and hostility. We called our conditional love in Islam better than the unconditional love of Christ. Alas, I did not know that the supreme desire of Muhammad in Islam had nothing to do with forgiveness, righteousness, and spiritual progress, and therefore wasted half my life with the rituals and instructions of Islam. Islam focuses on the world and worldly desires. Jesus gave his life for friends and enemies to draw their attention to love and holiness, but Muhammad did not allow even his friends to express themselves in his presence. He slaughtered his opponents. How could I call Jesus less spiritual than Muhammad? How could Muhammad call himself, but not Jesus, the finisher of God's work? The prayer of Christ on the cross revealed all the misinformation and injustices of Islam and also the filth of my heart to me. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Luke 23:34. No committed Muslim can fathom such forgiveness from Christ. That's why Muslim scholars and fighters have always tried to call Jesus a jihadist in order to justify their hatred of Jews and others. Time and time again, Yasser Arafat called Jesus the first Palestinian fedayeen, trying to relate him to Islam's sword philosophy against the Jews. As the veil of hostility had covered my face, it did the same with Arafat's, not allowing him to understand the heart of Christ. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. Ephesians 6:12. Christ's war is not with humanity, but with the enemy of humanity, Satan. Satan cherishes ignorance, bigotry, hostility, and bloodshed. Christ humbled himself, left his heavenly glory, and appeared among us to save us, not to hate and kill us. His humble attitude shamed me for the hostility I had towards him and his people. I didn't know that the hostility in me was my own enemy too, but he knew. While I was not able to see this enemy in me, Jesus saw its ambush and became a shield for me against its arrows. Jesus had every right to ignore or reject me, but he didn't. His heart is like a faithful parent's heart that does not condemn his or her child for wrongdoings, but gives a chance and even lays down his or her life and wealth in order to protect the child against foes. This is what he did for me. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah 53, 4 and 5. Every sacrifice of Christ turned my heart to my motherland, and I cried aloud to him and said, "You deserve to be the master of my nation. If you open their eyes, they will appreciate what you have done for them." I remembered a great proverb from my motherland that said, "Never forget even the kindness of an enemy." In my culture, unlike Islamic culture, if a person rescues you from death, you will always feel indebted to him or her, showing them a special respect. But if you turn your back on him, everyone will complain and say to you, "Is this your response to kindness?" Anytime you see this person, you have an obligation to remind him how he saved your life. You feel proud to call yourself a son, a daughter, a brother, or a sister to that person. After I realized what Jesus had done for me, I felt honored to call him my Savior, brother, father, redeemer, friend, or anything that could express my love and appreciation to him. For me, Jesus was no longer a son of jihad who imposes his beliefs on others. He was the son of kindness, love, holiness, justice, righteousness, wisdom, and reason. Through him, I learned the heart of God said that real victory in life was not in killing men and women, infidels in Islamic context, but sparing their lives for God. The desire for a person's death is a contribution to the kingdom of Satan, because Satan loves death over life. Now, I needed to act against the desires of Satan and lead people to salvation and peace. I found it urgent to align myself with the mission of Christ to save souls, no matter who they were.